Hey folks, Alan Mandic, the HotRodHippie here. This video is the first in a series of videos where I'm going to be working on this fender right here in front of me. I have this old fender off a 72 Beetle, and I'm going to show you from beginning to end how I would go ahead and fix this panel up. It's got some rust, it's got dents, it's got dings, it's got tears. We're going to fix it all. So let's check it out. Now, as I said in the intro, this is the first in a series of videos. I don't know how many videos it's gonna be, but in this video right here, we're gonna go ahead and assess the panel as I would do if I was working on this at the shop, and we're gonna knock a few of the dings and dents out of it. We're gonna be doing all that in this video. In future videos, I know for a fact we're gonna be making repair panels to fix up a rusty area of it. We're gonna be welding in that repair panel and finishing off that repair panel, which are three things folks have heavily requested on this channel we will be doing on this fender. Now, the first step in any project in my eyes is assessing the project, meaning you need to take a look at the overall picture and see what everything needs to be done. In this situation, this is a bolt-on style fender. It bolts onto the car. I would both look at it, how it fits on the car, make sure that it's flowing properly, everything's lining up the way I expect it to. And then I would make note of areas where maybe it doesn't fit properly. Like, that's away from the body here. I need to figure out, is the body damaged that it's causing the fender not fit? Is the fender damaged that it's not fitting properly? You want to figure those kinds of things out before you disassemble things. Then you need to assess, taking an overall look at the damage that is on the fender. How many dents and dings are on there? How many tears are on there? How much rust is on the thing? At the end of the day, very specifically this situation, it makes more sense to buy a fender more often than not. That is what we did here. On the 72 Beetle that I'm working on at my day job at A-Class Act Auto, we bought replacement panels for the thing. That's why I have this one, because we're not using it on the project. I'm just using it for demo for you folks. Because the fenders that are available for that car are so affordable that even if I have to spend time making them fit the vehicle properly, it's going to be less time than it would be to rehab this fender. You have to decide whether or not that makes sense for you. If you're doing it for your own project, DIY, then you're gonna have to decide if your time is worth it in that situation. If you're doing it for a customer, labor rates add up very quickly. Even at $60 an hour, $100 an hour, a replacement fender becomes pretty cheap when you start talking about the hours it would be required just to repair the rust on this, let alone the dents and dings. Now, moving forward with the assessment, once I've determined that I am going to go ahead and fix a panel, I'll remove it from the vehicle, and then I need to strip it, whether it be chemical stripping to remove the paint and primer that might be on it, mechanical stripping with something like a Porter Cable Restorer or a DA orbital sander to get that heavy body filler that a lot of these old panels unfortunately have on them off there. I might need to hit it with a torch to burn off some old lead fixes on a panel. In this case, this panel was media blasted in a sandblasting cabinet to get it down to the finish you see here. The point of that is I need to get down to the bare metal so I can truly assess what I have. I don't want to be starting to repair a rusty section, strip back the paint a little bit and find out there's a whole bunch of Bondo with a big dent right next to where I'm going to be replacing rust later because I missed that at the beginning. Now, the next step in assessment is actually feeling around the panel, checking for inconsistencies, dents, dings, eyebrows, and various damaged sections on the panel and actually marking them so down the road I can remember what I need to address. I need to go over this panel with a fine-tooth comb. I need to feel over it, run my hands over it, make sure I feel every inch of it, and I check all over it to make sure the size and shape and everything is proper. Now is a really good time to start comparing the panels with the other panels on the vehicle. Maybe you need to check this rear fender against the other rear fender. Looking at this one, you might say, oh, it looks all right. The overall shape is pretty good. But then you look at the left side fender and you realize, you know what, that shape is completely different than what I'm dealing with on the right side. What's going on here? You need to kind of step back and figure that out before you dive in, because maybe you want to make the right side match the left side, or you want to make the left side match the right side. Those are things you need to think about going into the project. This is where I really love having multiple Sharpies in my pocket, because I can go ahead and mark, say, a high spot where I've got a ding outward or an eyebrow that's raised up in a panel with one color of Sharpie, and then I can use a different color Sharpie to mark the dents and dings, the low spots, and that can help me just a quick glance to know where my highs, where my lows are, and that can be really vital when it comes to dent repair later on this panel. So I'm going to go ahead and wipe down the panel with Brake Clean. That helps me get a good clean surface, which I can run my hands over freer without coming off with a whole bunch of dust. And actually, as I run my hand over with this lubricated basically towel, I actually get a really good feel for the panel. Like I can feel a dent right there. I can feel that I got a wavy kind of section over this wheel arch opening. So this kind of helps me give a preliminary feel for the panel while I clean it off. I can feel an eyebrow right around there, high right there. I'm gonna have a couple of lows that I can see say right about here and right about here. Now I've got a pretty good low spot right here, and I've got an eyebrow right next to it here. An eyebrow is basically like your eyebrow. It is a peak on the panel that is just raised up. It's a higher spot that kind of often comes in the same shape as an eyebrow, kind of a partial circle. It's got a radius to it, because this dent here probably forced this area of the panel up a little bit when it went down. Not everybody marks things with a Sharpie or something like I'm doing here. I do that because I find it very helpful for me to not forget where I'm working, and also just to highlight the areas that I need to pay attention to, because I don't have the best feel for this. As I run my hands over the panel, sometimes it's a little hard for me to determine what is going on, and I find the mark just helps me to remember a little bit what I did feel. Now the last part of assessment is we need to go ahead and determine what parts of this need to be welded or fully replaced and repaired. On this panel, we've got a rear taillight section that is just rotted. There's quite a bit of rot on this area of the panel that's going to need a replacement piece. There's no way around it. We're gonna have to shape the piece and then weld that into this panel, hammer and dolly it, the whole 9 yards. We will do that in a future video. We also have at least one tear in the edge of this thing where the panel must have gripped onto something, you know, somebody bumped into it in a parking lot, whatever. It tore the very edge of the panel, and that's gonna require welding to repair that. So once I'm done with my assessment work on the panel, it's time to actually start working on it. A lot of people might think that they want to start with shaping out panels and welding in rust repair patches. Hold your freaking horses. That is not where you want to start this work. It seems like the place you want to start because you're filling up the holes and you're getting everything done, and it's going to look so much better right off the bat. But you need to start with dent repair. You need to start with dinging the thing out and getting it in the shape you want it to be. The idea here is once you start hammer and dollying it, knocking the dents and dings that a panel has out of it, you'll start to realize the actual shape of the panel. You might have a dent right next to where you need that rust repair to be, and if you don't knock it out first, you might be shaping a repair panel into a dented section of metal, and you're just going to be fighting yourself in the long run. Now clearly the largest area of rust we need to deal with is around the tail light. Obviously the gasket behind the tail light must have trapped water and dirt and such that eventually corroded and rotted out this tail light area. So we're going to make a replacement piece for that, weld it in, finish it off, all of that in future episodes of this series. Right now, I want to address this big dent to the side of that area because I need to get that shaped in properly before I work on shaping out the replacement piece for back of the tail light. We're gonna go ahead and work on this area right now. I've actually done a dent video before. You can check out the link to it up here. This is gonna use some of the principles that I covered in there, so I'm not gonna cover everything as we dive into this, but let's get started. I'm gonna start by using my radius gauges, and I'm gonna check the shape of this panel in the areas that feel less damaged than the others. The idea here is I want to know about the shape that this panel should be in that area when I'm done fixing it, and it'll also help me to pick what dolly I'm going to use behind this dent. Now my radius gauges are pieces of metal that have these radiuses cut into them, and each one has a number next to it indicating the inches of that radius. This allows me to check the panel and look for what sizes I'm going to need for hammer dollies, as well as dies for the planishing hammer or English wheel anvils to use when I'm making replacement pieces or working on the panel. You can see with the 52-inch radius, you can actually see the low spots underneath the gauge where that material should be up to the gauge itself, but it's just not because of a dent in this area. Now I'm going to use my Covell hammer and dolly set here, and I've got this dolly that has a heavier radius every direction than the actual area of the panel that I'm working on, meaning that it's rounder than this section of the panel. If I was using a flatter dolly or even just a straight up flat dolly, I would end up leaving heavy marks at the edge of a dolly because it would be bridging over the panel. It wouldn't be right. I'd be flattening out the section. I want to be bringing the section up. The dolly's purpose is to push up on the low spots while you hammer down on the high spots of the panel around it. Now I'm going to throw in my ISO-tuned hearing protection to protect my hearing while I'm hammering on this panel. I never work without these things. Check out my full product review up here at the link above. What I'm going to start with is off dolly hammering, meaning I'm going to go ahead and put the dolly underneath the low spots, the dipped in sections. I'm going to take the hammer and I'm going to strike on the high sections, the eyebrows in this case. The idea is that while I support the low spots and then I hammer on the high spots next to that, the hammer is actually going to force the material down and around the dolly, bringing those low sections up and those high sections down. For some of the larger low spots, I can actually take the dolly and smack it up from underneath to try and bring them up and use it slightly as a hammer, though I don't want to do that to excess because it's really not what the dolly is intended for, and it can have unintended consequences when I can't exactly see where I'm striking. I'm having trouble getting this low spot up with this ridge next to it, so I'm gonna actually flip over the dolly to where it has even heavier radius to even more focus on that low spot while hammering on the high. Pretty much everything that I've been doing here has been off dolly hammering. I have not been contacting the hammer onto the dolly through the material because that creates a stretch, and I'm not trying to stretch this, I'm just trying to move the material around. However, I can use on dolly hammering just to locate the dolly. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make sure that I have a dolly exactly where I want it to be by tapping on that spot and positioning the dolly underneath of it. I'll hear the material difference, I'll hear the strike on dolly, and then I'll move away from that because I don't want to hammer on dolly. I just want to make sure that the dolly is held where I want it to be, and that's the easiest way to locate it on the panel. Now, I did a Tooltip Tuesday about slappers before. You can check it out at the link up here. I'm going to use this to kind of strike on a larger area. The hammer will strike on a pretty specific zone, whereas the slapper will kind of cover a larger area. So as I'm trying to smooth out things and just finish off, the slapper's a little bit nicer and a little more gentle on the panel. Now you might see here while I'm hammering, I'm striking in a kind of side swiping manner. I'm not driving down into the panel. Doing this side swipe actually kind of helps to push the material the direction that I want it to go. So I swipe, say, from the high to the low, pushing the material that way. And it also means a slightly lighter strike. Less chance of damaging the material by hammering too hard on it if I lightly strike and then swipe sideways as I hit. You can actually see the fenders taking on a shine and a gleam. That's actually because the hammers and the dollies that I'm using have a good surface finish on them. I've done whole dedicated videos about good surface finish on your hammers. Every time you strike the material, you're leaving the imprint of the hammer face on the material, striking at least a little bit. When you have a really good, shiny, smooth surfaced hammer, that means you're not leaving imperfections in the material. You're actually smoothing material just with that good surface finish on your hammer. If I had a scarred up, damaged hammer that I used to drive nails and then I started striking on sheet metal, I would actually leave scars and worse damage to the material than it already is. That's as far as I'm going to go in this video. I've got this thing largely roughed out. It is significantly better than it was when I started. I've got the shape just about where I want it. The rest of the panel is blending into it nicely. Overall, this is what I was looking for. I need to get this shape right so when I make a patch piece for the rusty area, this isn't affecting that. And while it's 6-7 inches away from there, you think it might not, it can and it will, especially when you start to weld in a patch panel. Often when you see warpage in a panel, it can be the forces of the stretch or the shrink or whatever's going on with a damaged area being released by the heat of the weld and affecting the other areas of your panel. We'll cover that more as we get to that section of this whole series. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments down below. I know this is a difficult thing to translate on video. It's difficult for me to see exactly what I'm doing. I'm mostly working by feel. Sometimes you look at a panel and it looks perfectly fine, but then you'll feel it and suddenly you see a dent you didn't see before because you felt it. It's weird the way your mind ties those two senses together often. We're absolutely going to double back to more hammer and dolly stuff as we go through this series on this fender. When I weld in the patch panel back here, I'm going to have to hammer and dolly that, and we're going to work more on that process there. When we're all said and done, all the patches are welded in here, we're absolutely going to have to do a final hammer and dolly pass on this thing, and we're going to have to hit it with a shrinking disc. So I'll probably do a whole dedicated video just of a shrinking disc as we go through this. This area right here, I could absolutely see hitting with a shrinking disc very soon because I definitely feel like I've got a stretch in here somewhere. Somewhere a dent stretched out the material in this little area, and I would like to knock that down with a shrink, but I'm not going to do that just yet because I want to do a dedicated video on that. All right, folks, that's going to wrap it up for this video. If you found it interesting, please go ahead and drop a like. It really helps out. Let me know in the comments down below. Did I cover this the way you were hoping I was going to cover it? Are you really excited to see the rest of what I do with this series? Let me know in the comments down below. Please consider sharing these videos. It really helps the channel to grow. The bigger the channel gets, the more projects like this I can do. Subscribe to keep up to date with all the Hot Rod Hippie content. Thanks for coming around, folks.